worst is yet to come. And he is convinced that Vladimir Putin showed, quote, determination to continue the military operation and to continue it to the end. Ukraine's President Zelensky asked once again today for the United States and NATO allies to provide a no-fly zone over Ukraine. He said, quote, if you cannot introduce no-fly zone now, then tell us now when you will do it. If you cannot tell Ukrainians now when you will introduce it, then what else do you need? Tell us how many people must be blown up, how many legs, arms, heads must be torn off and fly away to finally reach you, to make you introduce a no-fly zone. How many? Tell me the number. I will go myself and we will count and wait until the time comes. President Zelensky, the bravest president we have seen, President Zelensky is understandably asking for everything he can think of to protect the lives of the people of Ukraine. But President Zelensky has not taken an oath to protect the lives of the people of the United States. President Biden lived through every day of the Cold War and served in the Senate during most of the war. He has spent some portion of every day of his professional life thinking about America's nuclear arsenal. President Biden understands his first duty is to protect the lives of Americans. And so he is doing what every president, Democrat and Republican, did during the Cold War. There are no good choices in a Cold War. President Biden, like every Cold War president before him, is making sure that the United States does nothing to provoke a nuclear attack by Vladimir Putin, who appears to be the most unhinged commander of Russian nuclear weapons in history.
President Zelensky is calling again for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Is that something you're giving any thought to at all?
Again, the reason why that has not been a step the president has been willing to take, or we have been interested in taking, is because a no-fly zone requires implementation. It would require essentially the U.S. military shooting down Russian planes and prompting a potential direct war with Russia, the exact step that we want to avoid.
No nuclear power has ever fired a shot at another nuclear power. Never. Not one shot. And it's not going to happen now. And so no American pilots or NATO pilots will go into the air over Ukraine to enforce a no-fly zone by shooting down Russian pilots, because that is how you enforce the no-fly zone, and because that would risk nuclear war. A risk the President of the United States can never take. Nuclear war is the one kind of war that you won't be able to watch on TV, because New York City would be targeted in a nuclear exchange, as would Washington, D.C., and many other major cities. And so the people in buildings like this one who deliver your TV news wouldn't be here anymore. And you probably wouldn't be here anymore either. If you're not old enough to have lived through the soul-crushing agonies of the Cold War, I am very sorry to say you are living through them now. Chairman Schiff, we've been puzzling here over is there any strategic reason you could conceive of for Russia to attack a nuclear power plant?
No, I can't imagine what the thinking is there. I understand, although it's reprehensible, why Putin has been essentially using the nuclear saber-rattling tactic to just raise the temperature, but to risk the release of radioactive material to make himself even more pariah, I can't imagine there's any strategic thinking to it. So I have to imagine that this is more incompetence, as well as a willingness to just attack civilian targets, even without knowing what they are.
Yeah, we have to remember this tonight, I think, especially in this coverage. We have seen a great deal of military incompetence on the Russian side, including inoperable trucks because their tires are too old. Just kind of stunning situations like that. And so it is entirely possible that that's what's at work here, including a unit kind of operating in a renegade fashion.
You know, you can't exclude the possibility. I think there have been a number of crude surprises that have been coming Putin's way. One of them is really how poor the Russian planning is. Now, maybe part of the reason why the Russian planning is so poor is that Putin is isolated, and Putin hasn't wanted to share his thinking with others. And, you know, those in his inner circle are probably terrified of contradicting him and even telling him that he was not going to be greeted like a liberator in Ukraine. He's also, I think, been rudely awakened to the strength of sanctions, the degree of Western unity. All of this, Zelensky's leadership must have come as a rude awakening to him. But he has to be really displeased with the performance of his military. And I have to hope, because I don't think he's insane, that attacking a nuclear power plant wasn't on the list of Russian war plans.
You know, we've never had a chairman of the Intelligence Committee have to make the point that I don't think he's insane when referring to a Russian dictator. But that has been an active question. And when I hear you say that, I know that you are briefed at the highest level by the intelligence community on everything about situations like this, Ukraine, Russia, and the mental state of Vladimir Putin. Are you confident in your own are you confident in the intelligence briefings you get on this, and are you confident now in your own understanding of what Vladimir Putin may be capable of?
You know, I think that, Lawrence, the intelligence agencies have been pretty spot on in their assessment of what Putin's plans were, in their disclosure of Putin's false flag operations, Putin's timing. So I have to give them a lot of credit. Tragically, they've gotten this exactly right. In terms of Putin himself, I think we have pretty good visibility. Not perfect, but I think we have pretty good visibility. You can tell, though, just watching open source, that he is isolating himself. You know, in that highly publicized incident where he dresses down the head of his intelligence agency because he wandered off script. You can see how far away from Putin he's requiring people to even sit. And by that display of humiliating one of his top officials, he's basically telling the Russian people that not even his top people are safe from him, but he's also telling his top leaders they dare not contradict him. And I have to think that COVID isolation, the isolation from getting candidate advice from even his top people because they're scared to give it to him is resulting in a lot of really poor decision makings. But I don't think that's a mental health problem.
Representative Gomez, first of all, what was it like for you to be back in the House gallery for the first time since January 6th when you were fearing for your life there?
It was triggering. My heart started racing right away. I started talking to some of my colleagues, and I mentioned to them that this was a difficult moment for me because it was the first time since January 6th where I was laying on the ground, texting my loved ones to tell them that I was with police and trying to make it out. So for me, it was an event that I know I wanted to be at, but it was something that I needed to work through mentally and emotionally so I could calm down and listen to the president's speech. So I was back that the President of the United States was Joe Biden, I know he would have called the National Guard if anything would happen.
And you're looking down where the president's being heckled by these members of the House. You've written, you're the author of the resolution to expel Marjorie Taylor Greene, and you're watching her heckle the president. What was that like for you?
It was disgusting. It brought the January 6th insurrectionists right into the Capitol. It was that same kind of behavior, that same instigation that Marjorie Taylor Greene used to spread the big lie, to cause the mob to break in, to put people's lives at risk. And it was just a poor display of decorum. And one of the things that it also reminds me of is that Kevin McCarthy doesn't have control over this faction of his caucus, the QAnon caucus, and they're willing to do and say anything and pal around with white nationalists and use racism to turn out the vote. So for me, it was just disgusting to see, and it was also shameful when she talked about, talked about and heckled the president regarding his dead son.
Now, your resolution, you'd introduced it before Marjorie Taylor Greene appeared with someone who praised Adolf Hitler and praised Donald Trump while also praising Marjorie Taylor Greene. Has there been any more interest in your resolution since Marjorie Taylor Greene embraced that praise of Hitler?
People don't, the Republicans don't want to hold Marjorie Taylor Greene accountable. They know that she speaks for a faction of their base, and it speaks to a faction within the Republican caucus. So they refuse to hold her accountable. But that doesn't mean that she's not continuously making the case of why she should be expelled. I originally introduced it because she literally said that Speaker Pelosi, or liked a post that Speaker Pelosi, somebody should put a bullet in her head, or that people posing with AR-15s with the members of the squad. So she is somebody that uses rhetoric to incite political violence and then says it's only free speech. So we need to make sure that we hold her accountable. And there's some people are getting some spine in the Republican caucus, but it's still not enough.
Among those fleeing are journalists after Russia blocked its last independent TV channel, TV Rain, and the network made the decision to shut down. Several of its leaders fled the country in fear for their safety. For the station's final broadcast today, those staffers remaining in the studio gathered for a farewell at the anchor desk. While others waved goodbye over Zoom, the broadcast included an emotional farewell from TV Rain's editor-in-chief, who told his colleagues, quote, "We are on the right side of history." This is TV Rain's editor-in-chief just a week ago, interviewing top American State Department official Victoria Nuland on his network. Now that network bringing information to people inside of Russia, is shut down. And he has been forced to flee Russia for his safety. Joining us now is Tikhon Zhidakho, editor-in-chief of TV Rain, Russia's last independent TV station. Mr. Zhidakho, thank you so much for joining us and being here with us, especially under these difficult circumstances and conditions. I know that you and your colleagues at TV Rain have left Russia because you felt that staying there posed a personal safety risk for you, your teams, your families. We know that the Kremlin has severely restricted media freedom in Russia this week, but have there been specific threats made against you and your colleagues at TV Rain that you can tell us about?
Well, yes, that's correct. 3 days ago, me and two of my colleagues, we started to receive threats in texts on our phones and in the messages in social media. This is something which have been happening all the years when your phone number is published somewhere, and usually you don't pay a lot of attention to it because it's some part of a, information war, I would say. But now in these circumstances, it is completely different. In this atmosphere, you start to think differently about it. So yeah, I consider these texts pretty serious.
Can you describe, I mean, you described the texts and the threats and how you're taking them serious, but can you just tell us about the last week in terms of working as a journalist in Russia? Can you describe for us the kind of environment that you and your team were working in specifically after Putin launched this war against Ukraine?
Well, on last Thursday, the world changed. I was heading to the office because I had a show. TV station in the cab. My producer called me and Vladimir Putin announced that he started a war. So everything changed afterwards. We changed our normal programming, so we became almost non-stop on air shows, and we've been working 24/7 as normal journalists. We had journalists in Ukraine. We were talking to them. We were talking to politicians in Russia, in Ukraine, in the West, etc., etc. But then the situation started to change. First, there was this huge problem with the military censorship in Russia. It is a very interesting situation. Russian government does not admit that there is a war. Russian government even forbids to use the word war. It says to use words special military operation, but at the same time there is no war, but there is a military censorship. So first TV Rain and some other medias, we get a warning from Russian government that we have to use only official information from the Ministry of Defense. And of course, it's impossible. Right. If you use only this information, you become the part of the state propaganda. And in several days after our website was blocked. And website, as you mentioned, the website of Echo Moskvy and some other medias. Just 2 days ago, just 2 hours ago, the website of Medusa, it is a very popular independent website, was blocked as well. Yeah. And I think, and I saw that Facebook is blocked as well in Moscow. So, as you mentioned, it is a huge and the strongest crackdown on independent media and the independent mind in Russia. It's pretty terrible.
It is terrible, and it is frightening to see this information blackout being imposed. I just want to ask you really quickly, if I can, your final thoughts, because as I understood it in your remarks to your staff, you said that no matter how bad things get and how many people might be pleased to see your station stop broadcasting, your channel will still win. How? How will you win? What does victory look like for you?
Well, maybe you saw that in Russia we saw the numbers that 62% of Russian citizens support the war. I do not trust these numbers, and I know that these numbers are false. This is not true. I know that not a lot of people in Russia support the war, and I know that even in the government, not a lot of people support the war, which tells me that somehow one day the situation will end. Somehow one day Russia will become a normal country, because the majority of Russians want to live in a normal, civilized country. And civilized country means that it has normal media, such as TV Rain. So I am completely sure that Russian people, they have requests to normal life, and they will finally, one day, they will get it.
I have made this point time and time again. The Russian people are not the Russian government. They are not Vladimir Putin. Tikhon Zetko, editor-in-chief of TV Rain. Thank you so much, sir. Russia's last independent TV channel. Greatly appreciate your time and your insights. Stay safe, please. for all of the latest on Russia's military movements now in Ukraine. I want to bring in Clint Watts, research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and of course, MSNBC national security analyst who is at the board for us. Clint, walk us through your readout of this situation, what you're seeing play out in Ukraine militarily.
Ivan, thanks for having me. Lots to talk about today. The first thing I think we want to talk about is what's going on in Zaporizhia. Right now at the nuclear power plant, everyone's worried about this firefight. Earlier, it looked like from some of the Twitter footage that was there was some sort of firefight going on there. You could see bullets moving off of the buildings. Very dangerous situation. And I think everyone's trying to figure out, is this power plant in jeopardy? Is the nuclear fuel essentially secured? And what's the danger and risk there? Everyone should probably be asking, why does Russia keep focusing on nuclear power plants? Remember, we were talking about them retaking Chernobyl late last week. There's a few reasons. One, they want to be able to control energy inside the country with the Ukrainian population, turn it on, turn it off. The second part is psychologically. They use that as fear. Fear is a weapon. That's why we're talking about it right now. We're worried about it, but also they can use that to create disinformation, misinformation at home, scare their population. And the third thing, which I don't think has been talked about enough, is logistics. Nearly all nuclear power plants have a railhead. When you have a large armored divisions and you have very weak supply lines, it's always great to get a hold of railheads, because if you do, you can move your armor around without consuming so much fuel and moving so slowly. Let's take a step back, though, on other developments today that are super important. We've been talking a lot about the convoy in the north in Kyiv. Russia hasn't done very well a week and a day in, but now what you're seeing them do is take control in the south. Several developments. These units here in Crimea was taken over in 2014. They busted out and created a land bridge all the way to Mariupol, which you were showing right there. Mariupol has been laid siege. This is siege warfare. This is the kind of stuff we saw in Aleppo and Grozny from the Russian army. Total complete devastation using indirect fires, knocking out all infrastructure. This could be a forecast of what the Russians want to do in Kyiv. Separately, and very importantly, from the same area, they have moved to Kherson. Kherson is one of the bridges that goes over the Dnieper River. The Dnieper River, flowing in from the Black Sea all the way up through the center of Ukraine, is a major artery. And if they can get through and over to that western side, they then have the ability to move all the way to the Moldovan border, essentially sealing off southern Ukraine and all of the port access, which would allow them, if they wanted to start landing military force in places in and around Odessa, essentially creating a southern front. Let's jump to the big picture real quick to finish off, which is what this strategy is. Their original strategy was what I call three fronts and a coup. They were trying to come in three directions, one from here, one from here. Neither of these went really well. Here in the south, they're starting to break through, but their original gamble was to do essentially a political coup in combination with airborne raids and an assassination, essentially, of President Zelensky. That has failed. However, if you watch what they're doing today and listening to Press Secretary Kirby from the Defense Department, what you're seeing them do is extend out this enlargement here all the way back up here to the Belarusian border. That convoy, which has been sitting there, that is logistical supply that they're trying to build up. They need to secure the rear area by destroying these population centers. They don't want to have an insurgency in their supply lines. From here on out, it's really a battle of logistics. We always say food, fuel, and ammunition. And it's going to be, can the Russians do food, fuel, and ammunition? And can the Ukrainians sustain food, fuel, and ammunition? I think from here on out, it's really a battle of logistics and who can last and who cannot. I think the last part I would want to say is they're going to try and do a siege around Kyiv. They can bring forces up from the south and link them in and then seal off to the west. That's essentially, if you've lost the sea and you're in Ukraine, your supply lines are over vast land distances from the west and have to come into the border areas around Poland.
We're still monitoring this developing situation at a nuclear power plant in eastern Ukraine after it was reportedly shelled by Russian forces. We have a new statement out from Ukraine's emergency services. They actually say that the fire broke out in a training building outside the plant's perimeter. It says the fireproof condition at the nuclear power plant is okay. I also just want to tell our viewers a really quick update that we just got. We got another readout from the White House on the situation at the nuclear power plant. This is the latest that we're getting. According to U.S. official, our latest information shows no indications of elevated levels of radiations. We are monitoring this situation closely. Again, the U.S., which probably has some real-time intelligence and eyes on the situation there, is saying they have no indication of elevated levels of radiation.
Something need killing.
Stands for Jinx.
This on your screen right now is a live video from a nuclear plant in Ukraine, in a city called Innovators. It is not only the largest nuclear plant in Ukraine, but let's be clear, it is actually the largest nuclear plant in all of Europe. And according to Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, tonight, Russia, right now, is firing on all sides of that nuclear power plant in Innovators. The mayor of the city says that the plant is currently on fire. This video was caught on the security camera earlier this evening, appearing to show some kind of projectile being fired at the plant. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which, as you know, works to promote safe use of nuclear power around the world, says that they are aware of reports of the shelling outside this plant that is taking place in Ukraine. They say they are in contact with Ukrainian authorities about this situation. Now, we actually talked about this plant last night because yesterday, you may recall, hundreds of the plant workers and people from the nearby city who live around it, they actually formed kind of a human shield in the road leading up to the nuclear power plant. Russia, as we have noted throughout this program and others, has already seized the site of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. And the fear is that Russia will try to seize other active nuclear power plants in Ukraine, which supply most of the nation's electricity. And so the people who live around this particular plant yesterday tried to block access to it, tried to stop Russia from having an easy time from taking it over. Tonight, according to Ukrainian officials, Russia is firing on all sides of this power plant. Again, you're looking at a live video that is being broadcast by the plant. And I should note that this is the middle of the night in Ukraine. And the number of people watching this static, grainy, black and white security camera feed of a nuclear power plant, it's not exactly must-see TV right now. But right now, in this very moment, thousands of people are doing just that out of fear of what could happen next, because the potential for a catastrophe here is just unparalleled. It is one thing for Russia to seize energy production in Ukraine, to cut off electricity, to kind of put the cities under blackout, but doing it by force, doing it with live ammunition, is just unfathomably dangerous. Like I said, officials say the plant is already on fire, and a fire alone can affect the plant's cooling system, causing the reactors to overheat and melt down, which is what happened in Japan at Fukushima back in 2011. And it's, in some ways, its own kind of slow-moving nuclear disaster. And then, of course, with fire and meltdowns come the potential explosion. More than 50,000 people live in the city around this nuclear plant. It is about 250 miles from Ukraine's second largest city, a little over 400 miles from Kyiv. And if we learned anything from the Chernobyl disaster, radioactive nuclear waste can travel far, it can travel fast in an explosion. The Ukrainian foreign minister saying this tonight: Russians must immediately cease the fire and allow firefighters to establish a security zone. If the plant blows up, it will be 10 times larger than Chernobyl. Joining us now is James Acton. He is the co-director of the Nuclear Policy Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Mr. Acton, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I think I and a lot of people around the world, certainly people watching this program, have a lot of questions about how exactly to process what we are learning this evening coming out of Ukraine. Instinctively, a lot of people are going to be concerned. What threat does a fire like the one we just heard about pose to a plant like this?
Well, thanks for having me on this evening, and this is a serious situation.
The first thing that I want to emphasize is that radiation levels around the plant appear to be normal right now. The plant's own website measures radiation levels. They put that data out in real time. The website crashed just before we went on air, I think just because of the sheer number of people trying to get access to it. But last time I was able to get access to the website, and last time, and the most recent information we have from Ukrainian authorities is that radiation levels at the plant are normal. The big concern, though, is the one that you highlighted, which is the possibility that a fire could disrupt the power supplies for the plant's cooling systems, without which there is without which fuel inside the reactor would melt down. Now, I have no knowledge of the status of those cooling systems, and in particular the status of the power supplies of the cooling systems, but that's the most important concern in this situation.
And the first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is being able to protect the cooling system and to try to put that fire out. That is just what instinctively appears to me to be the first cause of action, I should say, or course of action. From your expertise, what needs to happen now to mitigate the potential damage here? What can be done to prevent a potential catastrophic event?
You're absolutely right. The key here is to extinguish the fire, and thus to prevent irreparable damage to the power supplies for the cooling system. The concern that I've always had, had since the beginning of this appalling war, is that in the event that there were an accident at a nuclear power plant, such as a fire, that firefighters wouldn't be able to get to the plant, partly because they're so busy in other activities, and I'm sure this is a priority for them, but also because they're in a war zone. They can literally be shot by Russian forces trying to get to the plant. Ukrainian authorities have said that has happened. So I very much hope that firefighters have been able to get to the plant and have been able to extinguish the blaze. I have no information on the status of the blaze at the moment. But you're absolutely right that it's getting firefighting equipment and the firefighters to the plant that's the most immediate priority in this situation.
Just because you have much more, information and understanding of how this works, could an attack like this have the potential to drain the pools in which the spent fuel is stored at these plants? Can you tell us why that would be so dangerous and what the potential damage could be here? We heard the Ukrainian foreign minister describe this plant by saying it could be 10 times worse than Chernobyl. Can you put that in perspective for us? I'm not sure if you're aware about this plant and in terms of its output, just how realistic that would be.
So in terms of people are naturally going to Chernobyl as an example here for obvious reasons. The more relevant example is Fukushima. That would be a very one of the worst case scenarios from here. I'm not predicting that we are going to end up with a Fukushima-like accident. But that was a meltdown caused by a complete loss of cooling in the plant. In that case, it was a tsunami that caused all of the loss of cooling in the plant. In terms of spent fuel, I think it is extraordinarily unlikely that the kind of weapons that have been reported to be used around the plant would have the capability to damage the spent fuel pools. But if hypothetically those pools were to be damaged and were to drain, you have typically you have a pretty large amount of spent fuel sitting in those pools from all of the time the reactor has been in operation. Without cooling, there would be a serious risk of that fuel melting down, potentially releasing extremely large amounts of radiation. I want to emphasize here that nothing I have seen tonight in terms of the reports of the weaponry used around the plant makes me think there is any likelihood of a spent fuel pool accident. Rather, my bigger concern here is about the fuel currently inside the reactors and keeping that material cool.
No, I'm very appreciative that you're able to provide that perspective and context for us about what concerns you. I think some people who are watching this are going to be asking a similar question to what we asked just a couple of days ago when Russia was advancing on the site of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which is what would happen if Russia seized Ukraine's power grid and was able to cut off this nuclear power plant's access to it. Is that something that you're worried about? Because the assumption that is made by some analysts is that Russia wants to control the power that runs throughout the entire country as another pressure point to apply to the people of Ukraine in being able to, for lack of a better word, get their surrender in this conflict.
There's a very serious risk there. Nuclear power plants are not isolated islands that are entirely self-contained. They require, we've already talked about the need, in this case, for firefighters to be able to get there. The cooling systems, if a reactor is scrammed, if a reactor is shut down, and I assume that the 3 reactors that were operating today have now all been scrammed as a result of this accident, they require power to cool themselves. Ideally, that power comes from a nation's electricity grid. One of the concerns about a fire is that it can break the power connection into the plant. It's possible that shelling, if it's correct that the plants have been shelled, I'm not entirely clear what specific kind of munition is used, but it's possible that shelling could break that grid connection. It's possible that Russia could deliberately attack electricity grids, as, for example, NATO did during the 1999 Kosovo conflict. So there is absolutely a danger to the plant if its external electricity connection is cut. Now, there are backup power supplies within all nuclear power plants. They're typically provided by emergency diesel generators. I believe that is what this plant is